I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, our conversation with U.S. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, her approach to regulating autonomous cars. Plus, we'll bring you more big names from the Consumer Electronics Show, our conversations with the CEOs of ARM Holdings and Turner. And a member of Congress is calling out Apple CEO Tim Cook over the company's response to Batterygate. Senator John Thune speaks out. But first, to our lead. U.S. stocks fell for the first time this year. The S&P 500 index snapping a 6-day rally that was the longest since October. Let's get straight to our Bloomberg News stocks reporter, Abigail Doolittle in New York. Abigail, what brought this on?
Well, you know, Emily, with that 6-day winning streak and the record highs that we've seen for the major averages this year, last year, the best week for the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ since December of 2016, just a bit of a breather. The declines on the major averages at the end of the day, very small. So again, after those big gains, investors stepping back a little bit, especially before earnings season kicks in. That being said, we did see some real weakness in the chip sector. The stock's down 1.2%, down for a second day in a row. The worst 2-day slide since the beginning of December. Lots of the Apple suppliers involved there. There was a bearish report out of China on mobile phone shipments in China, so that really caused some pressure. And one ongoing concern around the chips, Emily, could be the fact that there has not been a record high since 2000. If we hop into the Bloomberg very quickly and take a look at G hashtag BTV 8808. This is the stocks over the long term, and we see that it's trying to bust above that last record high. But unlike the major averages, not a record high here. This is considered to be a tell by some of the most sophisticated investors in the world. So if we continue to see any weakness here for the chip sector, that could be a tell on some sort of weakness ahead.
Any standout movers contributing to the weakness? Yeah,
there certainly was, especially for the NASDAQ. eBay down in a big way today. Its worst day since October of 2016. And this has to do with Amazon. Their marketplace growing by 300,000 consumers, or small and medium-sized businesses, I should say, last year. So there could be some fear that they are migrating away from these other platforms, eBay and Etsy. However, Barclays out saying they expect an inline fourth quarter conservative guide. But today, certainly eBay and Etsy down, standing out in a big way, underperforming those small declines for the major averages.
All right, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much for that update. Now let's get to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas and the technology that is changing transportation. I'd like to welcome the Secretary of Transportation for the Trump administration, Elaine Chao. Welcome, Secretary Chao. Thank you so much for joining us. So
Thanks
we just spoke with Abigail earlier. Reports about the president possibly pulling out of NAFTA, creating jitters in the markets, bringing down railroad stocks, car stocks. How might this impact the transportation business in the United States?
Well, trade is really not within my my lane, so to speak. I'm here at CES in Las Vegas, and I'm here to promote innovation and creativity, which is the hallmark of American genius. You know, we are preeminent in the worldwide economy because of the high-tech contributions to technology and information technology. And being here has been just magical. There is so much energy and so much innovation. So the role of this administration at the Transportation Department is to make sure that we are not, one, hampering the growth of innovation and creativity. Number two, that we're examining our own regulations to make sure that our regulations are not slowing the rate of innovation. You know, innovation is very important, but we want to make sure that it is done in a way that is responsible, that promotes safety, security, and of course, privacy as well. 94%. Sorry, one other point. 94% of accidents occur because of human error. And if we have self-driving technology, that can really introduce safety on our roads. And of course, you know, self-driving technology can certainly give the elderly and people with disabilities a tremendous freedom and a much better quality of life. So
right,
thank you for letting me say all that.
Yes, Secretary Chao, we're going to get into self-driving cars, but I am curious that if the president pulls out of NAFTA, which has a huge impact on the transportation industry, do you see any risks there? Do you have any concerns about what the impact might be?
Well, as I mentioned, I do not think that would have any impact on the promotion of innovation and technology. That is something that, again, we're very focused on right now. And on the trade issues, that's not my lane. I'm concerned about promoting innovation in technology. America's preeminence around the world is in our contribution to innovation, and that's one of America's greatest competitive advantages.
So let's talk about the future of self-driving cars. Some have said that the federal government, has been a bit too hands-off when it comes to ensuring safety versus promoting innovation. How do you balance that going forward? Well,
while we are here at the CES site, the 1 millionth drone will be registered. So drones are here to stay. Self-driving technology is part of the near future. It's coming a lot faster than some people expect and a lot slower than others, but it is definitely coming. So our role is to promote the benefits of this new technology, while, as you mentioned, balancing the concern with safety. We have lots and lots of ways to ensure that this is done in a responsible way. One of the things that we are doing today, at 8:45 a.m., we have posted a request for information on 4 modes of transportation to see what regulations are hampering the growth and innovation in technology and what we should be doing within the federal government to reduce the unnecessary barriers to innovation in the transportation sector. So that's one way. And secondly, we've also issued guidelines last September 26th on automated driving systems. What do states have to consider when they're looking to legislate on autonomous vehicles? And we've also started a pilot program in drones. On October 26th, the White House issued a new initiative on how can we test drones so that the testing of drones doesn't go overseas as they are now. Many drone testing are occurring in Australia, in England. We have wonderful facilities here in the United States, and so we want to encourage the safe testing of drones in this country. So another example, right now drones cannot fly over the heads of people, and also drones have to be operated within the line of sight. There are now 50,000 new jobs for people who fly drones. That's a job categorization that was unknown like 5 years ago. So lots of things are happening, and the federal government has a role in ensuring, again, the safety, the security, the privacy aspect of this new technology that's developing.
One of the interesting statistics we were looking at is that deaths on the road have actually hit a 9-year high, which you would think it would be going in the opposite direction. And I'm curious if you have any concerns that the rise of connected cars, whether it's infotainment systems or in-car navigation systems, could actually be more rather than less dangerous.
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, 94% of accidents occur because of human error. And if we have a self-driving technology, hopefully there'll be greater safety on the roads. But as as you mentioned, there is anxiety. So 71% of Americans feel they're uneasy with this new technology. And so I'm here at CES also to challenge the tech sector to share their information and to help bring along the rest of America. Because as a former Secretary of Labor, I'm also very concerned about the dislocations in jobs. I'm convinced that in the long term, the new technology will create new jobs. As I mentioned, 50,000 new jobs have been created being a drone operator. That's not, we've never had that category until just recently. But there are also people who lose their jobs because of the disruptive technology. And so we as a society have a role, a responsibility, an obligation to lead on social issues such as this as well. And so this is part of the message, along with the two announceables that I just mentioned, that we are trying to foster and promote here at CES as well.
You mentioned earlier today that the FAA is concerned, Secretary Chao, about the number of drones that are flying, and we know that only a fraction of drones that are out there are actually registered. How concerning is that, and what are the FAA's concerns more specifically?
Oh no, all drones have to be registered, including hobbyist drones. And so some people don't like that, but but they have to be, as of now, the current law requires that they be registered. And the FAA has to, and the U.S. Department of Transportation, one of our great challenges is to integrate these drones, 1 million of them now, safely into our national airspace. Because as I mentioned, drones are here to stay. And drones are very helpful. We saw how helpful they were in the hurricanes of Harvey, Irma, Maria. I mean, the flyovers, the safety inspections, they were invaluable. We saw their value also in the flyover inspections with the wildfires in California. So there is a very public benefit of having these drones and the functions that they can perform. But once again, at the Department of Transportation, our concern is safety, security, cybersecurity, and privacy issues. And these are issues that we cannot do ourselves. We have to elicit information from the private sector and partner with all stakeholders in the nonprofit and the public sectors to address these very important issues.
Now, Secretary Chao, the administration has faced an unprecedented number of distractions, whether it's the Russia investigation or this explosive book by Michael Wolff. Now we see reports that the infrastructure package could be slipping to next month. When do you think things will start falling into place?
Oh, we've been working on the infrastructure proposal for quite a while, and very diligently, I might add as well. We hope to have the infrastructure come out around the State of the Union, which is January 30th. Infrastructure always came third. It came after the Affordable Health Care Act. It came after the tax reform bill. And then it is now the third item that will be legislatively considered. But one of the most difficult parts is how do you pay for it? So there's not an agreement yet, and we want to work with Congress on a bipartisan basis to address the deteriorating infrastructure of our country, because it obviously has impact on our nation's productivity and competitiveness.
All right, U.S. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao joining us from the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Secretary Chao, thank you so much for joining us. We've got much more from CES for you. Our interviews with ARM CEO Simon Segars and Turner Broadcasting Chair and CEO John Martin later this hour. Coming up, the future of net neutrality. Legislators and the trade group that represent the likes of Google, Amazon, and Facebook are preparing to undo the FCC's vote to repeal the law. This is Bloomberg. A legislative battle is brewing in Washington in response to the repeal of net neutrality. Democrats in the Senate are using a little-known law to debate in the hopes of undoing the actions of the FCC. It won't be easy. In fact, it may be impossible, as the House and Senate are still Republican-controlled. But this comes as the Internet Association announced it plans to act as an intervener in an upcoming case against the FCC's vote to repeal net neutrality. Joining us now, the CEO of the Internet Association, Michael Beckerman. So, Michael, thanks so much for joining us again here on the show. Why are you joining the lawsuit, or offering to join the lawsuit, but not filing your own?
Well, we are going to be party to the case, and so that's what it means to be an intervener. There are petitioners, and there's a number of the civil society groups, and some of our member companies will be petitioners. We're going to be an intervener, which makes us a party to the case, and so we will have strong standing and be very involved in the litigation.
It's been interesting to watch how the stance is on net neutrality by various tech giants have evolved. You know, some have come out very forcefully in favor of net neutrality, forcefully, you know, opposed the repeal. And then you have someone like Netflix CEO Reed Hastings, who came out pretty strongly on the side of net neutrality, then said, well, it's important, but it's not their primary battle. Why the indifference?
No, I don't know. Maybe that was taken a little bit out of context. I mean, I can tell you that all of our members care a lot about this. They're all very engaged, and you know, they've pushed us to be, you know, the tip of the spear for them fighting this. You know, both in Congress and at the FCC and now in the courts. It matters to all the companies, Netflix included.
You know, is there a sense of defeat now? They have bigger issues to worry about?
No, this is still fundamental. I mean, this is a fundamental protection for consumers that our companies care about, and really the future of the internet and what it looks like years from now. I don't think this is over by a long shot, but still, obviously, we have to go to the courts, and you mentioned we'll see what Congress does.
You work really closely with these companies. What are the folks at Facebook and Google saying?
They wanted us to be as involved as possible in the case, which we are, and that's why we announced that we're going to be an intervener. It's still early in the process, and so these rules are actually not in effect yet. Right now, the rules have been put out, so we know what they're doing, but the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, has to review it, and then the FCC publishes it in the Federal Register and sends that to Congress. 60 days after that, they will become actual rules, and we don't know when they'll be published yet. And then when they're published, it'll also set the clock on the CRA. They'll set the clock on litigation as well. What
is the process for the lawsuit and potentially undoing what was just repealed? Or redoing, I should say, net neutrality.
Right, I mean, the fact that they're redoing it, we do think, I have to be careful not to completely tip our hand on our legal strategy, but the fact that they overturned this so quickly, the FCC has to show that they're not being arbitrary and capricious in this new rule. And the market hasn't changed in a negative way since the 2015 rules went into effect. So we do think we have very strong standing in court to reverse these rules because you know, the service providers are investing in their networks. You know, there's just like nothing has really changed since 2015 for these rules to be rolled back, and so we think that we'll be able to get them overturned. But obviously, nothing is guaranteed in courts, and we're going to fight it really hard.
One thing that it seemed the commission didn't pay enough attention to was those public comments that were proven to be fraudulent, which were largely in favor of the repeal of net neutrality. Do you think more should be made of that? Like, what happened?
No, I mean, you know, it's, you know, unfortunately, I think if it was a vote, if this was something that came down to a vote or a ballot initiative of some kind, an overwhelming majority of Americans, both Republican and Democrat in every community, support strong net neutrality rules. I mean, that's obvious. I think, you know, no one, unless you work for one of the big internet service providers, legitimately thinks that they should roll these rules back, and you should have the internet service providers like AT&T, Comcast, Verizon controlling the internet, blocking, throttling, and deciding what happens. So the comments are good to have people say that, and it was very important for people to do it. But the FCC did what they did. And again, a majority of Americans support the rules, and we're going to fight to bring them back.
You now have states throwing their hands up, Washington, New York, California, saying we can make our own approach to net neutrality. What do you make of giving states more power?
Well, I mean, really, you know, the internet is a borderless medium, as you know. We think this is something that does need to be dealt with at the federal level. I mean, we do appreciate and will work closely with states to find things that they can do, but ultimately, this is better dealt at the federal level because, again, you know, we're talking about the internet and not something that can stay confined within the borders of a state.
All right, Michael Beckerman, CEO of the Internet Association. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Stopping by. Coming up, a U.S. lawmaker is not happy with Apple prodding the company about the company's slowing iPhones. We hear from Senator John Thune next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. A member of Congress is calling out Apple over its handling of slowing batteries in older iPhones. Republican Senator John Thune wrote a letter to Apple CEO Tim Cook asking for details on how the company is handling customer complaints. In an interview on Bloomberg Television, Thune was disappointed with Apple's response so far.
We just don't think they've been sufficiently transparent with the American people. There are a lot of customers and consumers out there who have observed and noticed the changes in some of these Apple devices, and the fact that they would have those devices degraded in terms of their capabilities without them knowing why, I think is what we're trying to get at.
Huawei's U.S. expansion plans have hit a serious bump in the road. A deal between the Chinese smartphone maker and AT&T fell through due to what many say is political pressure. Huawei had been set to launch its new flagship smartphone, the Huawei Mate 10 Pro, with AT&T in February. AT&T's cancellation comes weeks after the U.S. Senate and House Intelligence Committees reportedly sent letters to the FCC arguing that Huawei was a security threat. Pretty bad timing for Huawei. The company showed off the new smartphone at CES earlier this week. Coming up, as a longtime Netflix executive, she pushed forward the thinking that employees are adults and deserve freedom. And somehow, at Netflix, it worked. We talk with Patti McCord next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. During her 14-year tenure at Netflix, Patti McCord helped define the modern workplace. There, she wrote a now famous 124-page missive called Netflix Culture, Freedom and Responsibility that's been viewed 15 million times. But as we all know, Silicon Valley hasn't always been the picture-perfect image of maturity. Patti McCord, author of Powerful, Building a Culture of Freedom and Responsibility, just published this week, joins us now from New York. Patti, thank you so much for joining us. So what was it about Netflix specifically that you think enabled them to pull this off and actually pull it off well?
Well, we worked on it for a long time. The culture deck that you referred to, I actually didn't write. A number of us over the years wrote it. It took about 10 years to do it. And I think what enabled us to do it was we paid attention to it. So we didn't just assume that we would have a great culture that would stick around and be the same forever. We realized that we could innovate and evolve the culture of the company as long at the same time as we were innovating and evolving the product itself.
Now, in some cases, having the right rules when it comes to Netflix means having no rules, like unlimited vacation, which is the policy there. Do you think it's more about then hiring the right people or creating the right structure? It's
absolutely both. So if you create a structure that says you need people who have who like a lot of responsibility, they like to have a lot of judgment in their work, they want to make their own decisions, then you have to hire those people that do like to do that. And it's not everybody. And I wrote my book not as a memoir about what we did at Netflix. I wrote my book because I think some of the principles that we apply to everybody at work today, and that we can all think about work differently going forward.
Looking at Silicon Valley specifically, we've seen many examples where this industry has tolerated brilliant jerks, or so they're called. Looking at former Uber CEO Travis Kalanick, when you look at that situation, obviously he helped build a $70 billion company, but what went wrong?
I think people get enamored in their own success. And, you know, a lot of these companies received lots of money, and it was a growth at all costs scenario. And so when you grow fast and you're rewarded for doing that, then you assume that you're doing it right. So these things happen when things are going extraordinarily well. And, you know, we had a bit of a different circumstance at Netflix because at the time that we started coming up, we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of freedom to be able to go outside of the boundaries because we had a lot of work to do. So sometimes I think it happens because you're kind of overcompensated. You have so many people doing so many things that you stop paying attention to good discipline and good efficiency.
Now, part of the problem is that this idea of the young, brash founder or engineer or product guy is a stereotype that people buy into, whether it's investors who fund them or companies that hire them. You know, how problematic is this idea that that is what's ideal?
I think it's problematic across a lot of industries. I consult now to small startups and large corporations, and I talk to people around the world, and I see it over and over again. Some of it's human nature. You know, when you're successful, you think, I want to surround myself with other successful people, and I want them to be smart, and I want them to be articulate, and I want them to be fast on their feet. I want them to be, well, just like me. Right? So like hires like, hires like, hires like. But what's really interesting, I got interviewed earlier in the week, and the woman was asking me about, you know, how interesting it is that so many of these men who are fired from sexual harassment charges are being replaced by women. We were talking about Hoda in specific. And I said, isn't it funny, you know, I hear in the Silicon Valley all the time that the reason we can't have women in management positions is a pipeline issue, right? There's not enough qualified women to take the job. And in each of these cases, the women are already in the room. So, you know, she was sitting right next to him, Matt Lauer, at his desk. So I don't think we really have to look that far to find really qualified, capable women in our workforce.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about another Silicon Valley issue, which is that, you know, a lot of companies here, from Facebook to Google, provide these amazing perks, you know, meals around the clock, transportation services, gym services. You can bring your pet to work. You can get a haircut at work. You know, Netflix, on the other hand, as I understand it, was fairly light on these kind of perks and encouraged people to go home when you're done with your work. Do you see anything problematic about this sort of campus mentality?
Well, I got to tell you, it's pretty sweet here at Bloomberg in New York.
We do have some fancy
You do
snacks.
have some fancy stuff here.
I don't get to bring my dog to work, but other than that.
You know, I think anything can go overboard. I worked in the Silicon Valley for over 30 years, and I've seen the pendulum swing more than once. And so, you know, the problem for me with too many perks and taking care of people, from everything from their laundry to their transportation, you have to figure out what things make the company efficient and effective, and what things sort of treat people like children. And so, you know, I understand the trade-offs people make. I understand the transportation issue. In the Bay Area, transportation is really difficult, and we don't have the infrastructure that you have here in New York, for example, to get people around. But, you know, some of it just seems silly to me, and it might be just because I've seen, you know, I've seen the rich times and I've seen the poor times, and so I want to link what we do and how we treat people to our successes as businesses and to the delight that we give our customers and our clients. And if you focus on that, then you rethink some of that stuff. And, you know, that correlation that people assume that if I make employees extraordinarily happy, they'll be extraordinarily successful, I'm not sure I really buy that.
All right, Patti McCord, author of a new book out, Powerful, Building a Culture of Freedom and Responsibility. Patti, thank you so much.
Thank you,
for
Emily.
joining us.
Yeah.
Coming up, we will hear from ARM Holdings CEO Simon Segars on the continued fallout from that massive chip security flaw. That is next. This is Bloomberg. On Tuesday, we reported on a Japanese astronaut who says he's grown 3.5 inches since arriving to the International Space Station just over 3 weeks ago. That same astronaut is now apologizing for the statement, saying he, in fact, has grown just under an inch. And while it's normal for astronauts to grow while in space, they can also return to a normal height when they go back to Earth. And we continue our coverage now of the microchip security flaw affecting nearly all of the world's devices. One company feeling the heat, ARM Holdings, which is at the heart of the most major mobile phone components. The company says about 5% of chips made using its designs are vulnerable to the potential hardware hack known as Spectre. We spoke with ARM Holdings CEO Simon Segars from CES earlier today and asked how concerned consumers should be about these issues.
Well, clearly, the security issues that have been uncovered here, really are quite serious. They're quite fundamental about the way that microprocessors have been designed for many years, decades, in fact. And it is really important that people understand that as security updates get pushed out to their devices from whichever vendor, it's really important that they get installed, that software gets updated to provide maximum protection against what some bad person might do in trying to exploit these flaws. So it is a very serious issue, but it is one that the industry as a whole is taking very seriously. It's one that we're taking very seriously. We're thinking about our future designs and how to further mitigate against issues such as this. We're working very closely with our partners to make sure that the software mitigations that we've developed and have developed over a series of months are distributed, that people are using them, that people are installing them correctly, and that we can provide the maximum safety to any user of an electronic system.
How long, though, before remedies are fully in place?
Well, I think it's going to depend on which system, which type of device you're talking about. For some, it's relatively straightforward to update devices, but in other cases, there's a vast number of companies involved in the overall supply chain to get products to market, so it may take some time. It's really going to be case by case, and it's going to be up to the individual OEMs of the products who need to take on this software and get it pushed out to their customers. I mean, exactly how long that's going to take is a bit hard to say, but everybody is on this with a huge sense of urgency.
Now, Android updates are pushed much more haphazardly than Apple, which means some older phones might be left stranded. How much of a concern is that? Do you feel Android is more at risk?
Well, one of the things about some of those older devices is that they contain less sophisticated processors, which are much less susceptible to the security issues that we're seeing here. There are a vast number of Android devices using CPUs from ARM, which aren't susceptible at all to this security issue. So it's not a fair characterization to say that every phone that's ever been manufactured is at risk here, because that is not the case.
When it comes to the actual hardware, is there a fundamental way for you to redo your chip architecture to avoid this?
The hardware features can dictate how much risk there is. So going forwards, as we look at this, obviously, for anything that's easy to work around, we're going to do that. For some of the more sophisticated features, it is about the combination of the hardware and software that determines whether there is a risk introduced or not. And so I think what you're going to see going forwards is much tighter guidelines on how to write software to use microprocessors in a safe way. I think what this episode has shown is that we're in a new world of security. Security risks are changing all the time, and the definition of what safe looks like really has changed. It has caused a fundamental rethink of this.
I'm curious how much of a wake-up call this has been for you. Has it raised any concern that the chip industry is just too concentrated?
Well, I mean, it's in terms of a wake-up call. I mean, security is something that we take very, very seriously. We always have. We've been looking at the deployments of ARM processors in safety-critical systems, in security-critical systems for many, many years. So, we've always been looking at and thinking about how might a hacker get into a system, trying to stay, 2 steps ahead of how bad actors will try and exploit systems, and try and learn as much as we can from the research that goes on in a very broad way. This, at one level, is another case of a security issue that's been uncovered. It is different because it is much more hardware fundamental than others in the past. Many security issues that you see talked about are down to software and the way that software is written. This is much more of the interaction of the two, so it is a little bit different. I think one thing to take away from this whole incident is the way the industry has come together and collaborated in a really positive way. The issues around competition have been put aside as the industries work together to try and mitigate these issues. I think that's a really positive thing, because there are going to be new issues in the future, and the industry needs to react in the same way, work in a really positive way together.
But do you think the way that the industry has consolidated so much over the last several years could actually be a negative, especially when considering just how widespread this flaw is?
Well, I guess there's two ways of looking at that. You can say, you know, if there's a lot of consolidation, then there are a relatively small number of points of failure. On the other hand, with a relatively small number of parties involved, it's much easier to coordinate a response. You know, one of the reasons that we're seeing time taken to get all this software pushed out is because of the complexity, because of the diversity in the manufacturers involved.
That was ARM Holdings CEO Simon Segars. And coming up, our conversation with Turner CEO John Martin, what he has to say about the potential AT&T and Time Warner merger. That is next. And a feature I want to bring to your attention, our interactive TV function. You can find it at TV Go on the Bloomberg. You can watch an interview. You can go back to it. You can send us a message, play along with the charts that we show you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg. Back to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, where we were joined by Turner CEO John Martin. We asked Turner about AT&T's possible merger with Time Warner and whether he's spoken with AT&T's entertainment folks about what the priorities would be if this deal gets done. Take a listen.
I think the benefits of a Turner and more broadly speaking Time Warner connecting with an AT&T is right now premium content companies like us are racing, we're calling it a race to the center. We're trying to pick up more scale technology, more data, more ability to reach our fans and know who our fans are. And AT&T's data, their scale tech platform, I think is going to enable us to have really significant advertising opportunities it's just going to supercharge the strategy that Turner's been on. In addition, AT&T's DirecTV subscribers and its tens and tens of millions of mobile customer relationships are going to provide us new and innovative ways to get our content and products, maybe such as a Boomerang and Filmstruck, for example, directly to mobile customers, because I believe the next 5 to 10 years, the fastest growth in video consumption is going to be through mobile. So those are going to really be the priorities. Drive advertising, make it addressable, find out who our fans are, and then reach more and more people over more and more devices.
There are major regulatory challenges, however. What role do you think President Trump's disdain for CNN played in the DOJ's review of this deal?
I really have no idea. I can't possibly speculate. It would be inappropriate for me to speculate. Fortunately for me, I'm focused on running Turner, and we've got teams of incredibly capable people who are working really, really diligently and hard to make sure that the deal closes, and we fully expect that it will. And we're planning for that day to happen, and we can't wait to get going.
Fox News and MSNBC have made gains on CNN, largely driven by Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow. You know, what can CNN do to buck that trend, and do you think this moderate model, if you will, is sustainable?
Well, I think CNN's model is sustainable. If you look across the three networks that you just mentioned, Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN, all their ratings are up. Cable news ratings in 2017 were the highest that they've been in years. And yes, depending on the particular climate and depending on what the particular subject matter is, you know, it might be possible that MSNBC does a little bit better, or it might be possible that Fox News does better. But I will tell you that CNN completed its best year in 2017 ever. Record year. It's been a top 10 ad-supported cable network for 5 quarters in a row, something it hasn't been able to do in 22 years. So the CNN business model has never been stronger. And frankly, I don't think there's ever been a more important time for CNN's place as it relates to journalistic integrity and what it means not only to the country but to the world. I'm incredibly proud of what Jeff Zucker is doing in leadership there and what our journalists are doing every day. And we have no plans on changing, trying to be the best journalistic organization in the world.
Now, AT&T has talked about slicing up shows, making them more adaptable for a mobile audience. Is that something you'd consider doing?
Absolutely. I think it's something that we would do with or without AT&T. I think the ability to break down traditional long-form formats to shorter shows, making them available on mobile devices, frankly, maybe changing the windowing somewhat of our shows and making them available on alternative devices before they even show up on linear TV. I think all of this will be ways that we, with our big brands and our notable brands and our fans, we have to stay connected and engaged with our fan base, and we're going to be trying and experimenting with a lot of different ways to do that.
And beyond news, what does your pipeline of original shows look like, and how will spending on original content in 2018 compare to last year?
Well, spending will probably be up a little bit in 2018. Turner spends about $4 billion a year on programming. So that's a pretty big scale budget. A significant chunk of that is sports. We have about $1.5 billion to $2 billion of sports spending. We have relationships with Major League Baseball, the NBA, and March Madness. But our pipeline of original shows looks really, really strong. In fact, later this month on TNT, we'll be premiering The Alienist, which is a pretty significant project for us and one that we're really proud of from a critical standpoint, and we hope it finds a terrific audience. But if you look at the success, we're the only cable network company in the United States. We had 3 of the top 10 cable networks. We had 3 of the top 5 cable networks with millennials. All 8 of our original shows that have been put on the air over the last 2 years have been greenlit for additional seasons. We haven't had any that have been canceled. And we feel like we've got a lot of momentum right now and a lot of wind at our back creatively, and we want to keep that going.
That was Turner CEO John Martin. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.